maybe like catch up after the meeting. All right, guys. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about the lighting equipment, different kinds of lights that are used on most film sets.
Which I will say, I became terrified, and now I'm afraid of everything exploding.
It's just certain lights.
Yeah, but it's still scary. Like the idea, I'm just like, honey, from now on, when we like are on set, we're gonna have to tell everyone, careful with the light, or you'll die. Like, don't drop it. Don't like. I've become so.
Well, that's with all equipment.
I know, but it's
Don't
just so
drop any of
scary
it.
that the gas and the thing can like.
Yeah, all
It's a
right. Well, that
freaking
actually
light.
leads perfectly into this. Tungsten lights. Tungsten lights are the ones that are very hot. They can actually burn you if you don't wear gloves. This is what a tungsten light looks like. They are some of the older lights that were on like film sets and stuff. They're still used on a lot of film sets today, but they're used less than they were. They were like the only light you could get pretty much back in the day. And so they have a bit of older, I would say that they have like older technology, and then like the way the light bulb actually lights up is it heats up to produce that light, which is why it generates so much heat. So even the outside of that thing where the light bulb is, it's inside that cage, even the outside of that thing, they say can get up to like 300 degrees. So you have to be really careful when handling these.
Wasn't it 200?
Was it 200?
Yeah,
Either
it was
way, it's really
200, and
hot.
the inside can get up to 400 degrees.
I think it's 500, but either
Oh,
way,
right.
it's
You're
really
right.
hot.
You're right on the 500. I'm right on the 200.
Okay. Either way, it'll burn your hands if you touch it.
Yes, very much.
So they can
They
get
do
really
say
hot,
that.
and the longer you leave them on, the more hot they'll get. The light they produce is very, people consider it one of the best looking because it has a very high CRI rating, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it's just basically how it's gonna show those colors, and it makes those colors really pop and really look natural and realistic. So these lights are considered really good. They're like one of the highest rated for that scale to show light how it looks in natural life, to mimic the colors and everything when you're recording. And the light it produces is actually a warmer tone. It's a 3200 on the Kelvin scale, around that. So it actually like produces something like this, where if you had that tungsten light on her, it produces that warmer orange look. You can always use gels to make it turn back into daylight, but other lights are already daylight. So if you're going to go for daylight, you might as well just use something else, most people say. But if you're going for that warmer look, these are some of the best lights you can use to get it to look the best, I guess. But you have to be really careful with them because they are very hot and they get old, and they're a
So
little bit older. So
one of the things that the videos explained pretty well, because a lot of people are like, oh, tungsten is like, why do we even have these anymore if we have LEDs now and we have all these other things? But as much as like we've grown and we've hit a lot of advancements, we still, like, LEDs still cannot capture the same exact light, the same exact tone that looks just like the sun. Like, it doesn't look exactly the same, which is why people still use tungsten and lights like that are still like hot and a little more dangerous, maybe a little more take a little more knowledge and a little more practice in using, because we still haven't found exact substitutions.
yeah, because LED is like becoming really more prominent, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But LED is starting to take over on a lot of film sets, but you'll never get the same exact qualities because they're different lights. The way they're lit up are different, so the quality and the look aren't going to be exactly the same. And LEDs can't produce as much power as tungsten and HMI for the most part. So especially not HMI, which we'll talk about in a minute. But so that is why those lights are still used, because they produce a lot of light, very hard light. You can use, diffusion and stuff to soften the light, but if you just point this light at somebody and start shooting, they're going to have those very harsh shadows and that very bright light, probably like a hot spot somewhere on their body, depending on where you're pointing the light at them. So you'll probably need to use diffusion or bounces or something to soften this light, but it is considered very beautiful by a lot of people who film stuff. So if you look at that Kelvin scale, it's more on that orange side. That's why it gives off that warmer tone, somewhere in between the 3000, 3500 Kelvin, which is why it gives off kind of that yellowish tint or that orange hue or whatever you want to call it. Which is
They
also
also
something to
said-
consider whenever you're getting the light, because if you want it to look exactly like daylight when the sun's straight up in the sky, it's not going to be that orange. It's going to be a little bit more on the cooler side, or the white, I guess.
Another thing that I was like, oh, okay, was that apparently even after you take it out, they recommend you leave it sitting for at least 30 minutes so it can cool down completely before storing it, because it will get really hot still.
Because
Afterwards,
it'll stay turned on. Because the
it'll-
way that works is you heat it up, so it's kind of like turning off an oven. Even though you turned it off, it's still going to be hot. So even though you turn off this light, it still is heated. It still has some heat, so which produces that light, which is why it takes like 15 to 30 minutes to cool off completely, so that you can start packing it up. So they
And
say
then
it
a
also
bunch of-
adds time to the production day, because if you're wrapping up and you have these lights and you've had them on all day, then you're going to need to wait like 30 minutes or something for it to cool down and be able to be put back without causing some kind of fire hazard or something like that.
For me, just the explanation of how these lights work and how they're basically like gas inside of a chamber and all this kind of stuff, and if they break, it was just very kind of scary for me. And we don't want people to think, oh my gosh, if I ever work with these lights, we're gonna have an explosion. No. Like, I think that the second video explained it really well, the pros and cons. The first one was a little more like, these are horrible and have a bunch of negatives to them. And he didn't really explain why people still use tungsten as well. I feel like the second video did a much better job of that. And they still are very good lights. And it's not just tungsten, a few other lights as well. They just take a little more care and a little more maintenance and knowledge
And safety.
when it comes to and safety when it comes to using them. But we still use them for a reason, obviously.
When you put in tungsten bulbs, you don't want to touch them with your skin, because the juice is wrong term, but the fluid from your skin, oils, thank you, from your skin will cause the bulb to pop. And they're about
that was something else they were saying is don't.
Yeah, I was
don't
about
wanna
to say
move
that.
You don't want to move it when it's turned on either, because when it's heated up, it's more likely to be fragile. So you don't want to really move it as much when it's turned on. So you want to know where you're going to have to put it, which is why it also takes a little more knowledge. So you know how that light's going to look when you turn it on, and move it as little as possible whenever you have it on. Turn it off if you need to move it again. And then, like he said, when you're changing out those bulbs, they said if you touch that light bulb with your hand, even if it's a cool light bulb, a new one, you're touching it, it's getting that oil from your skin on it. Once it starts heating up, that could break that glass and make it explode out, which is why these tungstens actually usually have a cage on the front of them. You can see it in this picture a little bit. There's this little metal bracket. That's actually to block it in case it explodes, so that it doesn't shoot out at your talent or whatever you're aiming that light at.
You can
always gloves too.
Yes.
Oh,
you can always change it using $1 to, just wrap the dollar around the bulb, stick the bulb in, and then just wipe the bulb down a little bit more with $1. Anything to keep your oils to get on it.
Yeah, good tip. Yeah, so just whatever you can do to not actually touch it physically, but you should also have gloves, so when you're handling it when it's hot. Gloves do tend to get in the way when you have to plug something in, so there is that too.
So when touching it, you mean not touch the front, like the bulb put, or do you mean like the whole thing?
Like the actual bulb that you put in. Hold on, where is it? This.
Use gloves.
So don't touch that glass part with your hand if you're using one of these lights. I actually have 2 of these lights. And yeah, you don't touch that glass part, because if you do, not with your fingertips anyway, you actually have to use something like you said, like either like a piece of paper or a dollar or cloth or something that doesn't have that oil from your fingers on it, so that it doesn't get on that light. Because if it gets on that light, it'll heat up. And then if there's oil there, it'll make it heat up faster, causing it to
In
pop.
general, they just recommend using gloves when it comes to lights like these
Yes.
as much as you can. But yeah, I don't know about anyone else, but like hearing about this, it did kind of make me a little like, oh my gosh, like a little scared when it comes to like working in production and like people touching
This is
stuff.
why
It's like,
they're,
whew.
you know, they had like the safety people on set, and that's why they're there. And that's why they always talk about like safety hazards, and fire hazards is the main one, because things like these, if you're using things like these, they are very hot. And so they do tend to catch things on fire if you're not paying attention and you're leaving a cloth on top of it, or you're putting a gel too close to it or something like that. It can melt it. It can, you know, cause it to catch on fire. So you always want to be careful and aware of which lights you're using, and just be aware of the like what kind of safety precautions you need to take when handling them, like the light bulb thing. The other thing about these lights is because they're getting so hot, they're going to heat up the room. So if you're in a small space, it's going to get hot really quickly, and your talent might be sweating a lot more than they would if you were using other kinds of lights. So that's something else to consider if you're trying to use something like this. If you're using them outside in a sunny day, or if you're using them in a really hot place, these are going to heat it up even worse. So, you know, that is also something to think about whenever you're going onto a set somewhere and you really want this kind of light, but it's going to be a small space and it's already hot. You probably don't want to use these lights because it's just going to heat it up worse and make the whole production a lot worse.
Can I throw out one other thing on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes in office buildings, they don't have a smoke sensor for their fire alarms. They have a heat sensor. You do not want to put one of these lights underneath the fire extinguisher, the little heads that are in the ceiling. If they're
Otherwise
heat
it'll go off.
sensitive,
Yeah,
they can go off. So,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
just be
So
aware of
yeah,
that.
that's why it's always good to be aware of your location. Anytime you're getting somewhere, you need to know what you're looking for, and those kinds of things are good to know. If you know you're going to use tungsten lights, it's good to know what could have some potential hazards for that, or like you said, like something you don't really think about, like that, like the fire alarms that don't use the smoke detectors, but they're heat detectors instead, would cause the same problem as, you know, blowing smoke straight into it and raining down water on all of your equipment and all your crew and all your talent right at the wrong moment.
And the
Sounds so
fire
fun.
department will come and they'll shut you down.
Yeah, so that would
Oh,
be a
that's-
whole production day lost and possibly a lot of equipment broken and lost. So
Yeah.
Yep. My
um,
goodness.
now they can be gotten for pretty cheap. They're, you know, they're not extremely cheap, but they're not extremely expensive either. They're decently priced, especially now that newer lights have started to come out and these ones are used less. They've started to have less demand, so they have gone down in price.
At the end of the day, and Coda will probably, he's going to go into this a lot more. When we go into like different temperatures and different color temperatures and different stuff like that. But it is one thing that I focused a lot, that I was like, oh, wow, this is actually really important, was to know what kind of lighting you're going for, what kind of, not, even if you're not, let's say the cinematographer, if you're the director too, or if you're working with the gaffer department or something like that, to know what kind of lights they're using or what kind of scene they're going for, because there is a huge difference, which was another thing that I learned, and I was like, wow, I did not know there was this much difference between different lights, different bulbs.
Different light fixtures. Yeah, like there's just so
Yeah.
many different things you don't know until you start looking into it, and then you start realizing how little you know. And
Yeah,
seeing
I
that
thought it
there's a
was just like
whole
one's more yellow, one's blue. Boom, that's it, you know?
no, yeah. No. That's what a lot of people think about, like all these things, which is crazy because there's actually a lot more to all of these different jobs than you would think if you just like watched a movie and thought, oh, yeah, they picked up the camera and started rolling. No, there's a lot that goes into it. The other thing about these lights is the bulbs will need replacing more than the other variations of lights. So the bulbs aren't that expensive though, but it's just something to keep in mind. You might have to have extra bulbs just in case if you're using these, because you don't want them to break on set, not have a replacement, and then you have to, send someone out to get one, or your whole production day is gone if there's not anything close by. But like I said, they're considered one of the most beautiful lights with warm, powerful, hard light. If you use a dimmer on these lights, the color temperature is actually going to change because the way these lights work, they heat up, which creates that light. If you're dimming it down, then you are taking some of that heat away, which is actually going to change the color temperature, making it more orange. It'll be a darker orange on this Kelvin scale. So it'll go more towards this left side. Also, one person was pointing out that people, when they're using these, they have these things on the front, barn doors. Barn doors are things that you can use to shape the light, kind of mold it. You can make it square, you can make it into a little tiny circle just by shoving these in more on that light so that it's not spilling out as much. And you can also use what's called gels, which are these colored sheets of plastic pretty much where the light goes through it and it changes the color of the light. And he's saying, you can put them on these barn doors, but you want to have the barn doors extended out like they are in this picture. If you fully open those barn doors, they're going to be a lot closer to that light source, which just means it's going to be a lot hotter. And then if you put those gels on it, because they're just like little sheets of plastic, they are going to either melt, which will discolor them, or they could catch on fire. So you always want to keep them as far away from the light as possible while still getting that look you want. And you can use just like little wooden, what are they called? C47s, 27s?
47s are clothespins.
Yes, C47s, the little clothespins, the little wooden clothespins. You can use those to clamp them down onto those barn doors. And then you'll have that gel there. So you just want to keep that in mind if you're going to use these, or if you have somebody that's going to use them, you want to make sure they're not putting it too close to that light, because the person was talking about how they've seen a lot of people open it completely up because they want the light to spill out everywhere, but they also want to use the gel, so they put it straight on, and it's basically hitting right on that light, and it's a lot hotter the closer you get, and it causes problems on the production. And the last thing about these lights is that they actually have a knob on them that you can use to make it either more of like a floodlight or a spotlight. So it'll make the circle of light that it's shooting out smaller or larger by moving the light bulb back and forth inside that container. I don't have a example of that, but basically it'll just let you control where the light hits, and it'll hit a little harder the smaller the spotlight is. If you're thinking about it like a theater, if you're in a theater, like a theatrical play, they have those spotlights on the people, and they can make those smaller or larger, and that'll change how the light kind of looks. It'll be a little softer the more floody it is, and it'll be harder when it gets more pinpoint on the subject. Does anyone have any questions, comments, anything to add to that? Tungsten lights?
You want to try to match your lights. So if you're using a tungsten for a flood, and there are tungsten floodlights, you also want to use the same, and you kind of touched on this, the same bulbs and tungsten light for your close-ups, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, you're going to have a different color temperature.
Right.
So
just like in this picture, it's very different. Obviously, side of her face is blue. Some people go for that on purpose, but for the most part, when you're doing lighting, you would want to match each side of that light to tungsten or to daylight so that it looks the same. It's not blue or it's not ultra orange. This camera that they're using is set for the tungsten light, which means that it is like set so that the orange light is there, but it's like taking away some of that orange, and that's why it looks a lot more blue on the right side of her face. If you set it for daylight, then that light will look white, but the tungsten light will look really orange. And that's why you don't really want to mix your lights that much, because you can't set your camera for both. You can set it in between somewhere, but it's still not going to look the same as if you just use all daylight or all tungsten. And that's why you want to use the same color temperature of lights for each side and each part of your scene. Like you might want to color contrast it by coloring the background something different, and the subject, like if you put the subject daylight, the background tungsten, they'll really pop out. But it depends on what you're going for, and it's mainly just you don't want to mix lights on the actual subjects most of the time, unless you're going for a look like that. All right, leading off from that, we have HMI lights. HMI lights are still used on sets a lot because they are massive. They give off a lot of light. They look a lot like the other lights. You look at them just by looking at the front and the side of them, but they are usually a lot bigger for the same amount of wattage. If it's like a 650 watt tungsten and a 650 watt HMI, the HMI is going to be a lot bigger just because of how it's designed, and whatever's going on inside that light, it has to be bigger because it's a lot more complicated. These lights are usually a lot more expensive. They can be, thousands of dollars just for one light, which is, very expensive. They use a lot of power. They have very powerful lights, but that comes at a cost. They use a lot of power to create that light. They have to have these power ballasts, they're called, these little boxes where you plug that in, and then you plug in the cable to the wall into that, or into a power generator or something. And they will require a lot of power to do what they need to do. And that's why you want to be sure when you're going to locations, if you're using these kinds of lights, you want to make sure that your outlets have enough wattage to be able to, not short circuit by using this light on there. And that's why you have that when you're location scouting, you look into that kind of thing as well, which we'll talk about another week. But so they look a lot like tungsten, but they're a lot larger on the outside. But the light they produce is actually more on the daylight side. It's more like 6,500. Let me go back to that. So it's right about like overcast day, like if the sun was straight up, it has about a little tiny bit of blue, but it's mainly just like kind of a whitish light. A lot less orange, a lot less of a temperature. So a lot of people will actually use these lights on sets to mimic either the moon or the sun. Or if the sun's on one side, they'll use this light to either fill it in or give a key light to their person so that it either looks like the sun's hitting them or to match the sun from the other side. And because they're so massive and they have that same color temperature, it actually works pretty well. That's why you'll see sets with these like guys like this up on a crane with one of these huge lights pointing down at the subject, mimicking that sun, mimicking the moon. And it works really well. They can also get really hot, so that you need to wear gloves. They can get even hotter than tungsten sometimes because they're so massive. So they're, even more caution if you're using these. They're fragile as well. The interior bulbs, so you don't want to move them around again when they're heated. You don't want to move them. These ones even more so, they were saying like don't move them if they're turned on. You're supposed to turn them off to move them. And the other thing about these is they're made to be on for a long period of time, like a whole day of shooting. And because of this, they're not made to be turned off and on a lot, which is why these lights are usually not like a starter kit, because you need to kind of know what that light's going to do and where you want it before you turn it on, because the more times you turn it on and off, the more wear and tear to that light bulb, and the more likely it is to get damaged quicker. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, that's a pretty big light, and it's for more like bigger shoots, right? So something like
Right.
that, like it's in the crane, so it's one of those lights where they usually have them setup, kind of like overlighting the whole scene, or like
Yeah.
specifically a spot or through a window or whatever. I think from what I know and what I've seen, I don't know completely everything, but I
Yeah,
see.
no, you're right. Like this is like if you need a lot of light, these are the way to go. If you need to light up that whole scene, like when we watched Truman Show, the sun, that fake sun, it was most likely one of these because it just casts so much light. There's probably multiples of these, but they cast so much light that it looks kind of like the sun if it's, at the right angle and close enough to your subject.
Can I throw something in there?
Yeah.
Thanks. The other thing is that they do have smaller ones. They do have smaller HMIs. If you watched ABC News, they'll put a smaller one with about 750 watts on somebody in order to match daylight. And so like if you're out doing an interview on the street or a stand up on the street, you'll run one of these. And they actually do come battery powered also.
Do they?
So they
Oh,
become
wow.
mobile.
Cool.
So, and you can intensify them and again, flood them out to a certain degree, but they use them to match the sunlight.
Nice.
But
These are the
and
other thing about these lights is they take time to warm up. So
Yeah.
they might take, a few minutes to actually get to their full power, which is why these are also when you need to add, you'll be adding extra time to your set. You can't just turn them on and go. You have to turn them on and wait for them to heat up. So, well, I don't know if they heat up, but to get to their full brightness pretty much. And due to the way the bulbs are made, they say that over time, after like a lot of use, the light bulbs will start to shift to one color or another. So that's something else you have to look out for. If you use, if you're on a huge set and you're using these all the time, then eventually you have to replace the bulbs, but these will just start to have like a change in the color hue that they're giving off. So they'll have to replace them a little bit quicker than they would a different kind of a light bulb, pretty much. And
That makes sense. Certain light bulbs get burnt out quicker than others.
yeah, and so it's like these and the tungsten ones get burnt out really quickly and you have to kind of change them out. These ones just kind of give you a different color, so you have to really pay attention to make sure that you're not casting some kind of green or magenta hue on your subject when it should be just like a daylight white balance. Yeah, does anyone have any questions or comments on that? I think that's all I have for that. Just that you have to let them cool off before you can move them around, and so you kind of just need to know where you want them to be for the most part. Okay. So the other thing I was going to talk about is just the Fresnels. That's kind of what we were seeing with these. You can have a Fresnel and it could be a HMI, it could be a tungsten, and there's even LEDs Fresnels. Fresnel just means that it has like this Fresnel lens in front of it, which shapes the light, lets you make it more of a spotlight or make it more of a floodlight by bringing the light bulb closer or farther from this lens, and it actually like expands or retracts the light, making it more focused or making it a little more soft and on the edges. And that's just, it makes it look kind of like that thing on the left. There's also these open face, which means it has basically just regular glass in front of it. So it's just basically the light hitting directly to your subject. And that was it that I had on that.
Open face.
Usually you have those barn doors to help direct the light as well on a Fresnel. That's why we saw it on both of these, the HMIs and the tungsten. They both had those barn doors where you can shape that light. And Fresnels are known for having that smooth fall off from their light. They start really bright in the center and kind of slowly fall off as you get closer to the edge of where the light's hitting. So they're not hard completely all over, which makes it kind of easy to move the light and get just kind of a different look, just from giving them sort of part of the side light instead of directly on them or something like that. So it lets you kind of move it around and give them a few different looks just from moving the light up, down, left or right, instead of having to readjust it, put different diffusion in front of it and stuff like that, which are why people which is why people like these. Because then you can, just move it to the side and see if maybe a little bit of less light, maybe a little bit softer on the edge will look better. And then you can see if you like that. And then the open face lights, they have no filter. So the bulb, it produces a very harsh light with harsh shadows on your subject when you're using it. They can also have barn doors, but it's just they don't have that lens that lets you do those different things like a Fresnel lens will do. Next thing we're talking about is fluorescent lights, fluorescent tubes like this. They're very efficient, so they don't use as much power as the other two lights we talked about. They definitely don't get as hot as tungsten and HMI lights. You can actually even touch them with your bare hands without burning, which is nice. You don't have to worry about always having your gloves on if you need to quickly move it, because sometimes you can forget that and just pick up a light. And I'm sure after you pick up a tungsten or an HMI light and you burn yourself, you'll never do that again. But it is better and more safe to have lights that aren't going to get that hot if you want to, try to have it be as safe as possible. These tube-shaped lights come out quite soft, so they don't require as much diffusion or softening as the other lights. You can also change the color temperatures by changing light bulbs. Like these ones are set to tungsten, that's why they're giving off a warmer look. And you have these ones giving off more of that daylight look, a little bit more of a blue, white kind of look. These are easy to take down and set up, but they are a little bulky. You can stack them in lights like these, where they look more like a production light, where they have a few different variations, or they just want to have a bigger light source so that it's softer. So you can like stack these on top of each other in one of these kinds of light holders and then plug them all in at once. And that'll create a bigger light instead of just one bulb. But that will also make them a little more bulky if you're trying to move them around or you're trying to pack them up. These bulbs don't retract or anything, so they're just going to be this big huge bulb in your whatever you're carrying, some kind of bag or whatever you're putting them in. They also tend to give off a bit of a green tint, they say. It gives a little bit of like if you ever see a hospital scene, they have these lights a lot and it gives off kind of a green tint that makes them look a little sickly. And so they say that's not really, you don't really want that unless that's actually what you want. So if you're not wanting that, then just be aware that they give off a green tint, and you'll probably have to adjust your camera settings a little bit or something to negate that so that it doesn't look weird. And even still, you can never make it look exactly right from adjusting camera. I think you can never make it look exactly right by using camera settings in post-production. I think using a different kind of light would be better. But these do work very well for certain things. They also, but the other thing about these is they can introduce a lot of flicker depending on the frame rate that you're shooting at. Something like that, you'll see it kind of blinking almost when you're recording, especially with different kinds of cameras. And you really don't want that because it's very noticeable. And especially if that's not what you're going for, you don't want it to look like the lights are blinking, then you definitely don't want that to happen in your shot because that'll ruin it. Because they have a certain refresh rate that they go at. So if you don't set your camera to that same refresh rate, it'll start introducing that flicker. They are pretty good price. They're not too expensive, but they aren't used as much as they used to be because LEDs have started taking over what these used to do for the most part. But they are very long lasting. They do need a brief warm-up time, but it's much less than the HMI. It could just be a few seconds, or it could be like 30 seconds or something like that. But it's definitely not as much as the HMI require. The bad one of the scariest things for Priscilla was if these are broken, the way that they work, they actually have some kind of vapor inside of them that lights up from the electricity, I think that is. So the electricity makes the vapor light up and it creates light. And so if these are broken, that vapor is released and it can be poisonous to people. So if you ever break one of these on set, everyone should get out and
You
stay away
die.
for a while
I mean, you don't die, but you might die.
so that you don't you don't inhale those fumes. So if you break one of these, just leave this set and stay away for enough time for it to dissipate and go away, and then you can go back and clean it up and everything like that.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience. I didn't think I would learn about light bulbs and be afraid. That's definitely,
And be what?
and be afraid. That's
Oh, yeah?
definitely a new experience. But
She's afraid of light.
definitely a little more anxious about them now.
Yeah.
Bringing them to set, putting them in stuff, moving them around. I'm just like, oh God.
So with something like this, they say sometimes people they want a certain look, so they don't want a daylight look, they don't want a tungsten look, they want something in between. So occasionally people will mix the lights on purpose, like we were talking about. If they're going for that, they know what they're doing. They'll actually put a daylight, then a tungsten, then a daylight, then a tungsten, or the other way around, and that'll give off half of the the Kelvin, what am I trying to say? The temperature of the light will be somewhere in between tungsten and daylight to give off a different look. It won't look as natural, but it'll look the way that the people actually are trying to get it to look, I guess. So that's also something to keep in mind and maybe look up if you're interested in that, seeing what the difference would be and how it would look. But just be aware that you don't want to do that unless you want to do that. You want to be aware that that is not something you normally would want to do. So unless it's really something specific that you're trying for, don't do it. And they say that some of these require a ballast to power as well. That little brick that's kind of like a power. I don't know how it works, but you plug in the light to that first before you plug it into the wall. But it depends on how many you're using and what brand it is and stuff like that, because some of them will come out that are just easily plugged into the wall or something like that. So you don't always have to use a ballast for these. The other thing about it is that fluorescents don't just mean that they're those tube lights. Some can be lights like this. I actually have soft boxes that use it like this. They use 4 of these bulbs. Same thing. They use the way they're set up is the same. They just aren't the same shape. So all of the details about them are the same, but they just are a different shape. So you can put them in a different fixture. Does anyone have any questions or comments about fluorescent lights or anything to add on that? All right. So those are not too expensive. And you want to be aware of that because the cheaper they are, like we were talking about last week with the soft boxes, the cheaper ones are usually either really bad LEDs or really cheap fluorescent lights. So the cheaper lights usually give off those different colors, the hues of like either green or magenta. And you want to just be aware of that when you're going in to buy lights or rent lights, that the cheaper ones are going to most likely have some kind of coloration to them that you don't know, that you don't really want usually.
Oh yeah, that was definitely something that they reiterated quite a bit because like, oh, you try to buy like cheaper lights off Amazon or places like that. They're cheap for a reason and they won't give you the same color accuracy or the same reliability as higher quality lights. So
Yeah,
the
like
last
you
thing
might
you
see a
want
light
is
that's expensive and you might see a light that's cheap. We'll get into this in a second with the CRI, but it usually means that their colors are going to be a little different. They're not going to be as accurate as the more expensive ones.
that said, not every light just because it's expensive means it's good. Like there were also tests where they put a super expensive light against a fairly priced light, and the fairly priced light actually did a better job or did the same job. So it's all about the quality itself, not necessarily the price.
Right. Yeah.
Of course,
I
if
was
it's
just meaning like
super cheap,
usually when you look at
keep
it,
your eye
when I
on
look
it.
at something and I see a light that's $20 and I see a light that's $5, I'm like, well, why is this different? They look exactly the same. But now that I'm starting to learn a little more about it, it's like, oh, the $20 probably, I'd still look into it, still research it, like she's saying. Like, don't ever just say, oh, it's $20, it's better, because it could just be a brand that has a better name or more history, and this other one's a newer brand that's making better lights, but they're not as well known, so they can't charge as much. It could be something like
has a
that. So you always
question.
want to look at the details and figure out, your research it to see if it's going to be a good light. See what it looks like on some YouTube videos. So look at some people's reviews and see if it's a good product.
And always
These-
remember, never trust the reviews on the actual website of the product, because of course they're going to put the most positive ones forward. Always look at those like consumer websites, those review websites that are just specific for talking about products and people's experiences. Because of course the brand trying to sell you the thing is going to show people's most positive interactions.
Yeah.
V has a question.
You
in
always want to like
comments.
look at it. Oh yeah. So V said, do the soft boxes also have the vapor inside too? I couldn't understand that part, like the bulb. Yeah, these bulbs will go inside of that soft box. The soft box is just a surrounding material that goes around a light like this. So it'd be like a little fixture that has 4 screw holes for these lights. The ones I have anyway. And then I'll screw these into each of the 4 holes, and it'll have all 4 of these light bulbs light up at once. And then I put the softbox material around that to get that diffusion and to focus the light to where I want it to go using the softbox. So if these bulbs on screen, if they break, they do also have that vapor in it. So yeah, that is something you also want to be aware of to get off of set. If these or the fluorescent tubes are being used and they break, those can be poisonous fumes, and you want to get out of there. So to let it go, to let it go away, to dissipate and get out of that room or that area. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Fluorescent lights. So these are really good if you want to use like an office looking space, or if you want to use a hospital, like I said earlier, because these are in those areas. If you go to a warehouse, if you go to an office, if you go to a hospital, they have fluorescent lights in the ceiling. They're the big tubes, and they're up in those, they have like that little plasticky whatever thing in front of it that there's 2 tubes on each side usually. And it'll just look more like the actual places, so it'll look more realistic. But if it's giving you flicker, if you know you're going to shoot at a high speed, or if you know that you want to use an LED version of this instead, you can, and then it'll maybe look better and perform better than what these can do. So one of the newest lights that have come out to filmmaking, I don't know if I want to say one of the newest, but one of the newer are these LED lights. There's all sorts of LED lights. They can be all sorts of fixtures. Like I said, they can be those Fresnels that have that lens on it that look exactly like those tungsten and HMI lights we saw earlier. They can look something like this sky panel, which can be used for mimicking the moon or mimicking the sun or whatever. Mimicking the sun won't work as well. Everyone said this. And mimicking the sun won't work as well as if you get an HMI light. Those are the ones that you want if you want to use it for sun. But if you just want to use it to light up your set or to light up your subject, these skylights are very powerful for LEDs, and they give off a lot of light, and you can put them up in the air. They're just really expensive. They're a few $1,000s. So LEDs are very different. There's so many variations of them that you can have a lot of different price ranges as well, which is why you want to be careful with getting the cheapest ones, because they give off those green or magenta hues, which will make your subjects look a little different than they would if they were just giving off that normal white light or tungsten light. They are very efficient, highly efficient, even more so than fluorescent lights. So they don't take up very much energy, which is good. If you're going onto a set, you're going into somebody's house and they don't have much power wattage or voltage in their system, their electrical system, throughout their house. These are usually fine to use in any of the sockets because they don't take up that much power. They're basically like plugging in a TV or something. So there's a bunch of different kinds. There's these little ones as well. I've seen these on a lot of different things. The LEDs are actually just like these little tiny circle dots you'll see, and there's just like a huge bunch of them on one panel so that it looks like it's coming from one light when really it's coming from a bunch of tiny little ones. And that's usually what you'll find in those kinds of like sky panels or these or something like that. You'll just have some kind of covering over it, kind of like the softbox. It makes it look like the softbox is the light when really the light's coming from inside. Same thing happens with these. These just happen to not have the covering on them. They have those barn doors so you can, shape that light where you want it to go. And then they work really well and do a lot of different things. LEDs are starting to be used a lot more because they are usually cheaper. They are very efficient, like I said. They produce very low heat, which means they're not going to heat up that room and they're not going to be a problem to pack them up. You can turn them off and pretty much pack them up right away. You don't have to wait for them to cool down at all, even after long days on set. And you also can turn them on and they should turn on right away. They don't really they don't have a startup time like some of the other lights we mentioned. And so you can just flip them on full brightness, flip them off, pack them up. Don't have to worry about waiting for them to heat up or waiting for them to get at their full brightness or waiting for them to cool down before you can do those things. So they do tend to speed up production. You can also have LEDs that have, this is like the Fresnel that I was talking about. You can have something like that. It's still an LED, so it won't have that orange hue as much. It might try to mimic it, but it won't be the same as an actual tungsten light. But if it's a daylight set light, it'll have that white light coming out of it. Something like that. That's still an LED. It's from the same company as the other two that we looked at. RE is a big light company, so it looks very similar to their other lights, but the light coming from it's going to just make it look different than the other two that we looked at earlier, HMI and tungsten. One thing about these lights is that you can dim them. So you see this one in the back is very bright. This one right here is a little less bright. And the two on the sides are even less bright. You can some of the lights do this by just like turning down how much light's emitting from each source. And some of them, like this light, will cut off about half of the lights. You can see like all the lights are lit up in this one in the middle, but the one on the right, you have like every other light lit up. And that way they cut down that light without affecting how much light's emitted from certain ones. So they are very versatile, very adjustable. Some have adjustable colors as well, going from daylight to tungsten, like this. So you don't even have to worry about matching lights. If you have a lamp that's having a tungsten color, you want to motivate it, and you have this one light, well, you can just turn it to tungsten, and there you go. You don't have to worry about getting a tungsten light and shining it. You already have that option when you're using LED, because certain LEDs, not every LED is going to have this option either. So you want to be aware of which one you're getting, what kind of options it has. But some have the option to change between both so that you can match it to whatever color temperature that you're going for. And whatever light you're getting, whether it's outside daylight that's coming in through the window, which is going to look more like this one on the right, or it's like a fireplace or a lamp, or something that's going to look more like this thing on the left, you can switch between those to match that light so it doesn't look weird. Because like Nat was saying earlier, you don't really want to mix those lights. It's not going to look natural. Because whenever we have one source of light, we usually don't have the other source with us as well. We don't usually have fire going while there's the sun, and the sun's giving off this blue light, fire's giving off this orange light. You might have the moon in the sun, but that's like one of the rare occasions when you might want to do the mixed light. Another thing, they can also, some of them can do this where you turn on half of them as tungsten, half of them as daylight. So it's kind of like that fluorescent thing when you put the fluorescent bulbs in and you do 2 of each because you want something in between. You don't want daylight, you don't want tungsten, but you want something in between for that color temperature. You can do something like this. These LEDs, some have the option to turn on all of them and set half of them to the other color temperature. So you can get that same effect. The other thing about LEDs is you can also, some have multicolor adjustments. So like this one, you can change it to blue, red, well, I guess that's pink, blue, pink, orange, yellow, green. I'm assuming you can probably change it to red too. Basically any color you can think of, you can probably get an LED out there that can change those colors to give off that light, which is, I think it's really cool. It's really versatile and very lightweight, so you don't have to worry about it. Like some of those other lights were really heavy. The HMI is so big that they're going to be extremely heavy. Tungsten are pretty heavy for what they are, how big they are. But the LED lights are known to be really lightweight. And there's so many variations that you can get a little tiny one and put it in the back of your car very easily, so that it doesn't have to take up too much space with all the rest of your equipment. Just know that the bigger the light, still, like with every other light we're learning about, the bigger it is to your subject, the softer it'll look. So if you get a tiny light, you just need to know that it's not going to give off as much light most of the time, and it's not going to be as soft. It's going to be a harder light. So you'll have to get diffusion or something to get that softer light. Some can even go, I didn't have a picture of this, but some can even go in like these sticky pads where you can like put them to the ceiling of the car. And it's just like a pad that you can fold up even. And it's, you just stick it to your car, or you stick it to something. It has like Velcro or some material where you can stick it to different things. And then you can shine the light from there. It might not be as good as the rest of these. I don't know. I haven't really seen those before. I thought it was really cool when I was watching the video. But they're very versatile, and you can put them in different areas, and there's a bunch of different sizes, so you can do kind of whatever you want with these, which is why so many people use them and have started using them on more sets. I still don't think that they replace everything, but I do think that they're a very good option, especially for lower budget productions and when you don't have as many crew members and things like that, and you don't want safety issues. These are a really good way to go. Some LEDs even have built-in effects that can mimic things like sirens or street lights, fire, and more. So if you buy an LED light, certain ones you might get that can, do a flashing light, kind of like you would see in a police siren, or a fire truck or ambulance, anything like that. They also have ones that just kind of flip the light around in a circle, making it kind of look like you're driving by something, so that you can just be in a car that's sitting still, put the light over it, and it looks like you're passing by street lamps. And then you even have some, I think, that can turn different colors all in one. I don't really know if you'd ever want to use this, but I have seen one. I don't know if this one can do it. That's just the picture showing how many different colors it can be. But I know there are some that can do different colors in different areas of the same light source. So if it's like a tube like that, it could actually look something like that on that front picture. But like I said, I don't know if this one can actually do that, or if it's just showing what colors it can be. Many LEDs produce a soft daylight balanced light, but like I said, it'll depend on the size, the fixture, and the design. But that is something to keep in mind. If you just get these if you just get these panels, something like this, because they're a little bit bigger, and because of the way they're designed, they do give off a softer light, because for one, they're not as powerful, so they're not shooting as much light, which does create those harder shadows, like tungsten and like HMI would. And for two, they're close. You have to get them close to your subject, which makes them bigger comparative to your subject, which makes them softer. And I believe also just because of the way they're designed, however they light up, I don't really know the specifics, but because of the way they're designed, they give off that little bit of softer light, daylight balance most of the time. And then, oh, the other thing about LEDs is they can be battery powered, which Nat said HMIs can as well. I was actually surprised to hear that because they take so much power. I figured they would drain a battery in an instant, but that's really cool. They must be like a new, or some of the smaller versions that I haven't really looked into, but LEDs for the most part, a lot of them can be battery powered. They can have either their own battery pack that's rechargeable, like a camera, or some can even take AA or AAA batteries. So that's also something good. So then they can be either plugged into the wall or charged from a battery. So they're very portable because of that. But like I said, the cheaper ones give off different hues. And so you always want to be sure to check out what's called the CRI. And I'll get into that after we talk about the last lights. You always want to check that, make sure that it has one, first of all, and make sure that it's a good rating, because these lights, LEDs, are very known for giving off ugly colors if they're cheap and they're unbranded, especially. So just be aware of that. And because of how varied they are, how different they are, and how many different things you can do with these things, you might need a few different variations, but also the prices are going to be very different. So I can't really give a price range because they can be anything from, like $30 for a little tiny square that I actually have two that are like that, but they're probably not giving off the best color, but they're like $30 for these little tiny square ones, or a few $1,000s for one of the sky panels or something like that. So I'm sure everything else varies in price depending on what they can do, if they can change color temperature, if they can change the multicolors to like red, green, blue, and all the other colors out there, and if they can have those special effects to look like a siren or like a fire truck and all that. Yeah, V, this is most people's favorite option. And, there's a good reason. It's so versatile. They're so adaptable. And there's so many different things you can do with them. The only problem is because of the way they work, they don't give off as much power. Like, because they're not taking in as much power, they're also not giving out as much light most of the time. And they're definitely not going to be able to give out as much light as an HMI. HMIs are going to give out the most light out of any of the ones we talked about. And also, they're not going to give off the same color cast as a tungsten light. It doesn't mean the orange hue. It means like how they're going to represent the colors based on a real light that looks like that. So when a sunlight is down and it's like a sunset and it's close to the earth, well, it looks close to the earth to us. It has that more orange hue. And that's what they base it on. That's based on like how natural it looks. And tungsten, it gets really close to that. LEDs, not so much. So even if they can go tungsten color, they're not going to look like a tungsten light necessarily, because of the way the colors work and the way that light is showing you all of these things. But they are very good for everything. They're good for everything, but they don't replace some of the other lights just because they can do a lot. And that's something to keep in mind. Last thing is Liko Lights. Now, Liko Lights, mainly used for like theatrical plays, but recently they've started making their way into filmmaking because of their specific style. They are very strong spotlights. So they're good for making what's called sunspots. I think I have a picture. It looks something like that. Excuse me. They're able to shape the light with blades, kind of like how barn doors do, but they actually do it from the inside of the light fixture. Kind of like how a camera does it when you're closing and opening the aperture with those blades. So they have those 4 marks on the outside right here. It looks like little panels coming up out of the light. Those are actually the blades that you can adjust by moving down, moving up, moving left and right, and it'll shape that light to how you want it to look. If you want it to be a little smaller circle, if you want it to look like a square, you can do that with those blades on the inside. They're used for many different things. You know, they give off a nice color that goes across the whole, you know, a very long distance because they're such a spotlight that they shoot light very far distances. So they're often used, you know, like for applications like this to show the smoke and show the different color, or they can be a different color. You can have a different color gel on them or something to make it look red or make it look orange or yellow or blue. And so they give off a unique look. And they also have interchangeable lenses, which allows you to make it more spotty. And you can see that on the left. That's like a really small spotlight. The lens is making it smaller, so it's shooting out farther, but it also is harsher and smaller. So it's a smaller circle, but it's also harsher. The bigger it gets, the softer it's going to appear. And the smaller it gets, it makes kind of like a hot spot, which isn't always good because then you have to adjust for it and expose for it. So you need to know, you know, what you're doing with these, but just that they have these interchangeable lenses is always good. Some of the other lights like the HMI and Fresnel, HMI and Tungsten, they don't always have, they most of the time, I don't think, don't have interchangeable lenses at all. So, you know, having something that can adapt is always good. And these can do that, make it a bigger circle or not. You can see them being used in like a musician scene or something. If you were going to use it in a movie, you could use it for those same applications, how they would use it for a concert or for a theatrical play. But people also use it to do some unique coloring or some unique lighting effects on people. Make it look kind of like it's coming from, to me, this looks kind of like it's coming from an aquarium or, you know, one of those lobster, whatever you call them, that you would see in a restaurant where you see the lobsters in it. Someone's looking at it. Maybe they're feeling kind of bad about killing a lobster right there. Then it has the light shine from it, give you that kind of look. So people use them for unique looks because of the way the blades handle and the way the light is. It gives off a very unique, controllable light because it's so small, or it can be so small, I guess. You know, you also do this, make it look like they're appearing through the door, make it look like the sun's coming through something and shining. And some of them also have these like little metal grates that you can put on the front to make it give off unique looks. This one is obviously looks like trees. You also have ones that can look like it's coming in through window shades, and then, you know, just other kinds of unique variations on what light could be coming through. A lot of people use these for what's called sunspots. And that is like just lighting up a certain part of the background, kind of like what they did on that guy's face, making it look like the sun's coming through the door, but they're doing it on the background, making it look like the sun's coming through a window or the sun's coming through, you know, a ceiling, a sunroof. And you just get kind of like that nice sun spill look. So anyone have any questions about that stuff? I think these are unique. I think you can get away with doing this kind of stuff with other lights, but I do think that there's probably a reason why people started using these. And it's probably because they don't look the same. And it's harder to, that is actually one reason. They don't look the same, but they are harder to control. Like HMIs, if you were going to try to use this, you can use HMIs to look like the sun, but because they're so big, they're going to flood a lot more. They're going to spill out in a lot more directions. So they're a lot harder to control if you only want that one area to look, to have that look. You don't want the whole background to be lit up. Then it's a lot harder to do with HMIs or tungstens. And that's why if you want to do that, then the best way might be to go with a Liko light, since they're just small and easily controlled and can even have interchangeable lenses to make them smaller. Make sense? All right, so we were talking about CRI, and that's the color rendering index. And this is something you're gonna want to look at if you're ever buying a light. You want to make sure that you want to make sure that you know what you're getting. I mean, if you're fine getting one that has a lesser CRI rating, then that's fine. But you just want to make sure that you know what's gonna happen if you get one like that, because certain lights, like I said, give off that green or magenta hue. You can kind of see that in this picture of these apples. So the CRI index goes from 0 to 100. 100 being the best, making it look the most natural to whatever light it is being compared to. So if you were comparing it to the sun at midday, that's going to be more like daylight light. I think it's like 54 to 6500 Kelvin, which is more on that blue side. And if you're talking about the sun when it's lower, going down for the sunset, it's going to be more on the tungsten side when it's orange. So when you're comparing, when they are making this rating, they're comparing it to usually the sun or a light that they know is very close to how the sun would look when it's shining on one of these objects. So for instance, at 2700 Kelvin, so more on the tungsten side, an apple is going to look like the picture on the left, and less so the picture on the right and in between. CRI is 100 on the left, 90 next to it, 80 the next one, and 70 on the right. And you can see 70, for me, 70 takes a huge dip and it looks very purple. And that's because it's probably hitting a more magenta tone. So it's one of those lights that's going more magenta. And because it's going more magenta, it's making everything look more purple. So even though it's a tungsten light or a tungsten LED, it could look like that instead of looking like how you want it to, that apple on the left. Doesn't mean you can't, trick the camera into saying that, hey, let me white balance this and make it look like, tell it what white is so it changes the colors for me. You can always do that, but it's just better to know. If you can, it's always better to get these lights that are going to reproduce these colors as close to realistic and natural as possible most of the time, because it's just going to be a lot easier to deal with and a lot less time consuming to fix, whether you're doing that on set or in post. So you'll see like the color rendering index, people say around 90 to 100 is excellent. 60 to 85 is good, but it depends on what you're using. And then poor is 55 and anything lower than that. And something that doesn't even have one, they say is probably just gonna be really bad. That'll be like the unbranded lights that you get on eBay or Amazon or another website that don't really have a brand name. They usually don't have these ratings because they don't even bother. And if they're not even bothering to put it in there or to test it, then that means it's probably not that accurate to how colors really look coming from whatever light source you're trying to get the color temperature, whether it's tungsten or daylight. So it makes it just look a lot more vibrant for the colors. You can see the standard LED, and then like if you get an ultra high CRI LED, once it changes, you can see just how much more vibrant those colors look. So that's also something to think about. You might get the colors to look how they would, but they might not look as vibrant. They might not look as colorful. You can always fix this in post. Like I said, you can always, you can up the saturation in post, but it is harder to get done and it does take more time and it doesn't look as natural. So just be aware of that when you're trying to get a light. If you're okay getting a light with a lesser CRI, they might come out a little more faded looking like this. And you can just see like how the differences look from left to right, going from worst to best. They get a lot more vibrant. So another thing they say is about CRI, the color rendering index, is often confused with what's called CCT, which is the correlated color temperature. And that basically just means whether it's going to be tungsten or daylight. And that will change the way the light looks, because it's going to change the color temperature. But it doesn't mean that the the colors themselves are going to look different under that light. It just means that they're going to look more like how it would look during a sunrise for tungsten or during midday for daylight. And so the colors will change, but they will still look vibrant and still look realistic, depending on what you're going for. So CCT is that color temperature, and CRI is how good those colors look, how natural they look. So even at 80 CRI, it'll have a lot less color information, and it'll just look a little bit more gray, a little desaturated, I think. And there's certain things that you need to know about it as well. I don't think I have a thing for it. I should have. Well, one thing I saw, let me see if I can look it up. So there's something like this CRI chart, and that'll show the way they get this number, that CRI number, the 94.9, which would be considered really good. The way they get it is by taking every color that they're basing it off of and taking the average. So even though you have a high or a low CRI, because we're looking at it for video, we're looking mostly at red, green, and blue. And CRI is just looking at it mainly for like, natural colors and like color to the human eye. And since we're looking at it for video, we mainly want to focus on red, green, and blue because those are the colors that the camera is going to be looking at and picking up. So whenever you see that it has a high CRI, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look good on your camera. And whenever it has a lower one, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look bad on the camera either. The red, the green, and the blue, which would be R9, R11, and R12, those could be really high, and the rest could be pretty low. And that could mean that it's getting a low rating just because they're averaging it out. Vice versa, it could be very high like this one, and then you see red and blue, oh, those are pretty low compared to the rest. So just because the rest are high doesn't mean this is going to necessarily look good on a camera. Most of the time it does, but just be aware that it doesn't always mean that, because a lot of them have low R9, which would be red, and that is going to make it look more like this picture, because you can see all the reds are very faded out. They're not really capturing those tomatoes and those grapes and all of that, because that red channel is not as quality, it's not picking it up as well. It's not producing it as well. So when that light's shining on it, it's not shining for whatever reason, it's not giving out as much red. And so then it's not looking what it should. And that's why you want to keep in mind this CRI rating, but also look at one of these, that every light you buy should have one of those color charts where you can see which channels, or I don't know what you call these, but which I would say channels are high, which are low. And just, and then also look up some reviews on whatever you're buying to see if it matches what you want. Is there something else? With that being said, generally speaking, low CRI numbers don't produce accurate on video either. It was just something to point out, because some of them have had low numbers but still produce really well on video because those green, blue, and red channels are up high. But generally speaking, when they're low, when that CRI number is like 60 or below, or 80 or below even, it produces a lot less color than if it's 100 or 90, which is the best. Like you can see in this picture right here. One to the left is a lot more vibrant than the one in the middle. And then the one on the right is pretty faded. It's not as pretty. People say you start to notice when it's 90 or below. So when you're going for a light, try to get somewhere in the 90 to 100 range, but it might be a lot more expensive. So of course you also have to think about budget. Don't just think about what's going to be the best. Think about budget as well. But if you can, try to get one with a higher rating, just so it has more accurate color representation. LEDs and fluorescents, like I said, they often give off that green tint with lower CRI. So when you're buying LEDs or you're buying a fluorescent light, make sure you're looking into this thing, because that green tint will make people look sickly and it'll make everything look a little weird. And so the lower budget ones usually either don't have a CRI rating or they have a really bad one, which is why they're so much cheaper. And that will affect how it looks. Tungsten lights are between 99 to 100 CRI. So that is why people think that it looks so pretty. It renders those colors almost as if it were the sun on a sunset or somewhere around sunset where it would be that color temperature. It very accurately reproduces those colors, which is why it's still used, even though it's kind of dangerous and it takes more time. That is why some people still use it, because it still has its own look. It's still very beautiful for what it is. Now, if you already have lights and they're lower rated on the CRI scale, just avoid mixing them with higher rated CRI lights, because they said you'll very easily be able to see this. It's kind of like mixing the tungsten lights with the daylight and getting that blue and orange, but it'd be like getting a green and white, or it'd be like getting a green and yellow or something. It would look weird. It would look different. So if you have a lower rated one, use them with other lower rated ones, or upgrade to higher rated ones if you don't want to use those. Just don't mix them with the higher ones, because it'll look different. And you also want to do custom white balance on your camera every time you do a new shot or change where the positioning is or anything, so that it accurately tries to represent the colors, even though the light itself isn't doing that. The camera will try to make up for it. Last thing I'm going to say is TLCI is basically like CRI. It's kind of like the same exact thing. It's just, it looks into how cameras see the colors, and it works basically the same. It goes from 0 to 100, 90 plus being really good. So if you see a light that doesn't have CRI, but it has TLCI, that just means it's basically the same rating, but they did it more so looking at it from how the camera's going to see it compared to how our eyes see it, like CRI does. CRI is for our eyes, TLCI is for the camera. And so those are all assumptions as well. So you have to keep that in mind as well. Like it's assuming what an average camera is, and then it's assuming what that camera will see. So depending on what device you have, might change how it looks just from, your camera. Every camera gives off a different look itself. So keep that in mind too whenever you're doing these. Depending on what they used for their study, it could be completely different for you compared to maybe somebody else who has a completely different camera. But generally speaking, it's going to be pretty similar across the board. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that? And you can kind of see it like on this, the sun, it gives off, that rainbow of colors. It's going onto that apple, and that artificial white light that's set at 5,000. It's the same color temperature as the sun. They're both set at 5,000 Kelvin, but it's not giving off as much red. So it's a little bit more orange. And then you can see it dips down to like yellow, green, and the rainbow looks completely different. So whenever it's hitting that apple and then going into the camera or going into our eyes, it's going to have an orange look instead of that red look. So it won't look the same. And that's the best diagram of this I've seen, to kind of like visually represent what's happening when you're seeing it. All right, that was CRI. Anyway, I know it's a lot of like technical babble, but I don't know, it's good to know these things.
I think that when it comes to like LEDs and all these lights and stuff, the technical gabble, it's like when you actually are there and you're assisting someone to do these setups, you learn it very fast. For me anyway, because it's like if you're just looking at, names of lights on paper, it doesn't click. But when you start actually at least for me, if you go and you're on set and they're like, grab this light, and you're like, oh, it's this one, and you bring it, it's like just goes into your brain so much better.
Yeah.
Same thing like in construction, I had to do like hangers, and there's like a lot of different hangers at first. As soon as you played around with them, you started to like you pick up the numbering system very fast. I feel like any kind of like lighting system, like lighting setups and stuff would feel like that. And they'll have all the big gear and then all the lights that come in. I think like when you're ordering lights, it would be a little bit, you would have to know every single light if you're the guy ordering what they want for the set.
Right. And that's why I think it's good to always like do your research on anything you're getting, whether you think you know it or not. Just like check it out, make sure that other people think the same, and that there's a review that says, oh, it's good. And you can even see comparison videos on like YouTube or some other video site where it'll show what that light looks like compared to this one, and what that camera looks like compared to that one. All these things, no matter what you're getting, always do your research so you can see. And then you can get a visual representation. And like Sarah's saying, on-set experience is going to be the best, just hands-on, because then you'll see right up front, in person, what everything is doing. But it's always good to try to like learn it beforehand so you can kind of have a sense of what's happening.
Definitely. Like if I was going to be like there, you're like lighting, it's cool to just have like a list of all lighting with the pictures. Then you just go memorize it, know which light's that. You start to, the more you talk about it and you do these kinds of things, going over it, it starts to kind of click in.
Yeah.
And like the tungsten lights and using the gloves to touch the type of bulb, the 3-point, the 1-point, the big, I don't remember the names. What are the names of the really big ones again?
HMI.
HMI, those are the big round ones?
Yep. That's like the ones that they try to mimic the sun with. Or like
Okay,
the moon.
HMI mimicking the sun. That's cool. I like when they do that. And they use a lot of those big square ones. Like they use them often when you have them set up on the windows and coming through the windows.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's also cool.
Yeah, a lot of those bigger lights are used mainly to try to mimic real light. They're not used as much to shine onto the subject as much as they're used to look like the sun or look like the light coming from the window, like Sarah's saying. And so a lot of these big lights on productions that you'll see are just kind of off to the side to light up the background or light up a certain thing. They're not really used as much lighting up the subject themselves.
No, they'll have specific smaller lights to light up the subjects. Usually they have it for like the overall big lighting effect, because if you have a light that big shining directly on the subject, it's not going to go very well usually.
Yeah, it's going to look very shadowed and weird.
Yeah, and it's just too bright, and oftentimes the lights are offset by panels as well some of the time. Not like the panel in front, but like, how they had to set up the panels to the side of the lights. The black,
you mean like the barn doors?
Is that what they're called? The big black panels, the barn doors?
Yeah. The ones that are like in front of the lights that you can shape it with?
Yeah, that's exactly it. They're oftentimes on like the sides and the shaping the light, yeah.
Yeah.
That it goes to the place that they want and the overall feel. It's especially cool when you see them lighting up a house in studio, because they'll have the whole house set up, the lights there, and oftentimes they'll have like a huge backdrop and they'll have the big lights coming, like the sun behind the backdrop, and I think that's cool. And they have all of the ropes.
Yeah, I agree. Like anytime you look at some behind the scenes video, it's crazy to see how much they do for one scene.
Behind the scenes are super cool too, and like a crew has to have a lot of trust with every department. It's cool to see.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on CRI or any of the lights or anything we've covered so far? I'm going to move on to room tone. So now we're in sound. Room tone is something that you want to record for every scene that you do. whether you do it before or after the scene takes place, everyone in the room would need to stay quiet and be still so that they're not making any noise, so that you're only capturing the sound of that room. Every room has its own ambient noise, and every space is going to have its own noise. If you're outside, especially, it's going to have its own noise. And so you record room tone at the end or beginning of each scene for about 20 to 60 seconds. Just the room. Everyone else, be quiet, don't move around, stuff like that. You do this so that in your editing, you can overlay your clips so that there's one continuous sound instead of having moments of no sound, which will sound really weird in the edit because we're all used to having a tiny bit of sound always happening. The room tone, it's always around us. We're all used to it and our ears are used to it. We just might not notice it. We're not paying attention to it. But if it's taken away, you notice it right away, which is why you never want complete silence. They always say to have some kind of, some kind of tiny noise going, those low frequency noises of room tone. And that's why they'll usually record room tone if they are editing, so that they can take out some noise. Like if there's a random click all of a sudden at the end of a clip and they want to keep that part of the clip in, they just silence that part where it has that noise and they overlay it with some room tone so that it still has that underlying hum or whatever kind of noise the room is making. And that way it flows well together, edits well together, and it sounds good and doesn't take the people out of it. Otherwise, it's going to sound like two clips were put together because all of a sudden, they'll just be like random little no noise clips like that. You want to make sure you do it for every location. Whoever's on sound, if you're on sound or if somebody else is, you want to make sure they're capturing these room tone sounds in every location so that they capture each location and room, because they'll each have a unique sound. You can't go into one office building, record sound, and then expect that you go to your kitchen and it's going to sound the same. It's not. It's going to sound very different because of all the different appliances and the way the walls are and the way the room is and how big it is, how fast those sound waves are bouncing off the walls, and all these different things are going to make it sound different in each room you go into, which is why every space, every location and set, they need to record these room tone files so that you have them for editing. You can also use room tone to take out unwanted sound, which is a lot easier to do when you have that unwanted sound recorded on its own. Maybe you have an air conditioning blowing in the scene, and so your sound guy goes and records just the noise of the air conditioning. Then when you go into editing, it's going to be easier to take out that noise of the air conditioning, because the way that the sound editing software works, it will notice what that sound is like, the frequency which it goes at, and it'll take out that frequency. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but it basically just hears the sound and goes, oh, that's what you want taken out? Okay, and takes that out. So it's a lot easier to do when you have it, instead of trying to take it out within the clip itself when you have other noises like people's dialogue happening. So that's another reason to get sound room tone. If you're outside, then it's called ambient sound. You're capturing sound like traffic, cars, people walking, the air slightly blowing, maybe a bird or crickets, whatever you're capturing. There's going to be some kind of sound happening outside, and while you're recording your dialogue, you want to be able to match all the sounds that are happening around that area and that space, so you can do the same thing you would if you were doing room tone. Room tone is also useful when you need to lower or raise the gain, which would boost the level of how loud the sound is during different takes or parts of the scene. Because when you raise or lower it, if we're like for our project, when we're going to be whispering, we're probably going to need to boost the gain of whatever audio device we're using. But boosting the gain we'll be able to hear us whispering better, but it'll also boost the noise of the room. The room tone will be louder. So when you record room tone, it's also good whenever you have to, you have a scene where the people are getting ready to yell and then they're going to talk normal. you're gonna have to raise and lower your gain so that you're not clipping that audio and making it sound distorted. In doing so, you're gonna raise and lower your room tone noise. So capturing it separately, you'll be able to input the room put. You'll be able to capture it separately, the room noise at the higher level, and then just have the higher level room tone play throughout the whole clip. So it doesn't sound weird when all of a sudden the room tone is louder. That random little buzzing gets a little bit louder. It's a lot easier to notice than if it's just louder the whole time.
Good to know. It makes
Doing-
sense. Like it makes sense that like the louder it goes, the easier it is to notice.
Yeah, and
General.
you'll definitely notice that the person that boosted up the sound, because it'll be like, and all of a sudden it'll be like, and so you'll be like, oh wow, they just, you clearly can hear the difference whenever they boost the sound up. So whenever they do it, they usually capture the room tone at the louder level, because then they can just put it beforehand when it was quieter and you don't really notice it as much. Doing tests for audio, you want to try to find the scene's gain cap. That's what it's called, gain cap. That's what we were talking about just then. The gain cap is where you're going to have the gain highest for the scene. So if you know they're going to whisper, you know you're going to up that gain to make them be heard, then you know that's going to be the loudest you make it. That's going to be your gain cap. And that's where you want to capture the room tone. So some people say capturing it beforehand is better. One, you have everybody ready to shoot and you're like, okay, but before we shoot, room tone. And two, you know what your gain cap is going to be. You know how loud you're going to have to put the gain because you should have done audio tests beforehand during rehearsal. And so you know like how much gain you're going to have to give it to boost up that signal to make it louder. So you know where you need to record your room tone at. If you do it after the scene is over, it is a little bit harder, they say, especially if it's a busy set, because then people are ready to go. They're ready to get done. They're ready to, move on to the next thing if they're still doing another scene for the day, or they're ready to pack up and leave if it's the end of the day. So it's harder to get everyone to be quiet and still for a long period of time, which, it's not really that long, 30 seconds to 60 seconds, but it feels long if you can't move and can't breathe heavily and can't whisper and you can't do anything. So it feels like a long time, but it's really only like a minute or less. That's why they say like, beforehand. That's why some people like doing it beforehand, because it just makes people more ready. And some directors like doing it beforehand because it makes everybody a little more quiet and calm and ready to be quiet for whenever they start the scene. So just some things to keep in mind. If you have somebody and they're trying to get you to do the room tone, you know what it is. Or if you were going to do sound and you want to record the room tone, you need to be able to let everyone know. Because the other thing, you might need to record room tone in multiple times for the same scene, depending on how big the room is, where you're recording audio from, and if it sounds unique enough from each other. If there's a fridge on one half of the room and it's a big room like this picture, then you might want to record the audio, the room tone in a few different locations where you're recording the dialogue, especially if the people are moving around the scene, because at some point they're going to be closer to the fridge and at some point they're going to be farther away from it. And the farther or closer they are to that thing, it's going to make it sound different for the whole room, especially because of the walls and how it's bouncing off and different noises. So you might have to record room tone a few times. And also when recording room tone, be sure the mic is oriented the same. You have it pointed the same direction you were when you were recording audio of the talent. And also that you're in the same area you were when you were recording it. So let's take this picture, for instance. If he's trying to record that guy in the green, the white shirt in the green, that guy's gonna walk up to that spot and stop. And he's gonna start his dialogue. That's why he's there. Then when he's recording room tone, he wants to be in that same position at that same part of the room, pointing in that same direction so that he's capturing that same room tone. Because if he flips that thing upside down and he's on the other side of the room's going to sound completely different than if he is pointing it down at the floor in that position near that corner of the room. So that's something to always keep in mind. You can't just record room tone by holding the mic in your hand and pointing it at the ceiling, because it's not going to sound the same. And the whole point of room tone is to make it match and make it sound like a seamless edit. So if you're just recording it to record it, and you're not even like paying attention to where you were when you recorded the real audio, it's not even going to be usable. So there's no point in doing it. So just make sure that whoever's doing it knows that they have to be in the same areas they were. And that's usually also why it's good to maybe do it beforehand, so you're already set up in position instead of trying to remember where you were. Last thing, person recording the room tone, they always need to communicate with the assistant director or someone similar, like the line producer or whoever's on set, unit production manager, that they're going to need time for room tone, especially if they have to, like I said, if they have to record it a few times. They're like, hey, this room's really big. We're going to need to do, 3 30-second clips of room tone. So 3 different times we're going to have everybody shut up, be quiet, and stay still. And so if they know that beforehand, they'll be able to plan that into their day and communicate that to the rest of the crew. They always say that it's annoying when people don't communicate that, because then everybody's ready, and they're not. Then all of a sudden something unexpected comes up. Hey, we need to record room tone. Hey, we need to record it again. Hey, we need to record it again. Everybody's going to get a little agitated or frustrated or more annoyed. But if they already know beforehand that that's what's going to happen, then they're more ready for it. They're comfortable with it, and they're not as annoyed by it. So whoever's doing room tone, whoever's on sound, should be able to communicate, which is why the boom operator needs to be a personable person, like we learned last week. They need to be able to communicate with everyone and explain what they need, so that everybody can get it and nothing unexpected comes up. Does anyone have any questions or comments about room tone?
No, but being personable, I think across the board is it's good, although not always 100% possible, because I mean, yes, it's a good thing to strive for being personable all the time, but there's also like people work long hours and they can be snappy sometimes. Most of the time I try to understand and be like, yeah, it happens to everybody.
Yeah, the point is, you as the person, as the professional, can't be snappy. If other people are being whatever they're being, that's with them. If the person is there to do a job, you are there to do a job. It's your job to keep it cool. If everyone else is doing their own thing, that's their problem.
Yeah, I mean, mainly just for like the sound person, they need to be able to talk to people and communicate. Not so much, I mean, like they don't have to be, as friendly as can be, but they need to be able to communicate what they need, so that the rest of the crew knows what's going to happen and what's going to be done during.
I think a good example would be like if the actor is being a little temperamental and the sound person is going there and trying to like mic them up or something like that, and they're just like grumpy, just that sound person would just ignore it, just keep doing his job, just keep going. All right.
Yeah, I think it's going on that, I think of course it's always best to strive to be as personable and good tempered as possible, but everyone else, if someone's having an off day, give room for you. It's a team, like a whole team, so don't be that guy who's like, oh my god, I can't believe this person snapped at me today, and causes a huge problem over something minor.
Yeah, you're there to be professional. At the end of the day, if someone else is not being professional, that is not your problem. The problem is the person.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, it sucks, and I wish I could, when people are dealing with problems and people are being unprofessional and whatever, I wish that I could help more. I'm always torn between the wanting to step in and help, but
that's not your job. You're like, if you're there to do a job and you see someone, no, that's the thing. We need to go into this industry just like any other. I feel like because we're spending so much time with them, and because you're working long hours and you're interacting, and it can be kind of easy sometimes to have a friendship and kind of blur the lines a little bit. But we have to remember that we're there for a job mainly. And if it is in if it's something to do with our department, then we can come in and we can try to resolve it. Or we can ask for someone who is that department, like, hey, I think they need you over there. But otherwise, like, it's not our job. We're here to do a job. Unless that person specifically asks for our help, best to just move on.
Well, sometimes it is necessary to step in. And I mean, I can say that as for being like a first aid attendant, most of the time, if I see something funny, I actually have a legal obligation to step in when it's like health concern. So that's kind of a cool thing to know when I'm doing that job. Actually, even when I'm not, as long as I hold my ticket, if I see something, I have a legal obligation to do something about that. So
That's
I
part of
actually
your
do-
job.
Yeah, so I actually do have to step in. On the other hand, there's those situations where you have to know the difference between a situation where you can step in and help and an unsafe situation where you can't. Like, if somebody got
And
like,
also a situation where you should step in. Like,
should step
if
in.
the director is not doing a good, like, if he's getting something wrong and the person that works the lights or whatever, like, thinks he could do it in a better way or something like that, it's not his job to be like, hey, Mr. Director, I think this way it would be better. No, like, you're there to do that job. Let him screw it up if he wants to. Like,
Yeah, no, sometimes things have to be said and uncomfortable things have to be talked about and all sorts of weirdness. Safety is of the
yeah,
utmost.
but it's about the hierarchy. You're there to do a job. People are below you, people are above you. And at the end of the day, if in that example that I gave, there is the person who sees that the director could be maybe doing something else to get it out of the actor or something, whatever. It's not their job to say it because the director is the one above. Like, you wouldn't tell your boss, like, hey, boss, I think this paperwork, this meeting that you're going to have tomorrow, I think you should do it like this, like this, like that. Like, unless you ask for your opinion, you wouldn't do it.
There's a difference between overstepping your bounds of your job and stepping in when something is wrong. Like, say if you saw maybe a director or somebody else taking advantage. Okay, now that's a situation you'd have to step in. If you saw a situation where somebody was taking a hammer to somebody's hand, that's a situation you'd have to
Yeah, but you're going in extremes.
Yeah,
I'm actually
right.
talking about day-to-day
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's what we mean by stepping in, like in regular day-to-day situations, not like in extreme.
Yeah, no, in regular day-to-day situations, why would you want to anyway? Why would you want to
Right.
overstep? It
Yeah,
doesn't make
don't get
sense.
involved in things that you don't have to get involved with. I always say, like, 'cause
Well,
it just adds extra stress to you, and so just staying out of it's better if it's not going to actually help the situation. If you're just trying to give your idea or put in your, not really your idea, just give in your 2 cents when it's not even asked for, then yeah, like that's just kind of,
well,
that's
it's true.
you don't really want to do that.
I
I see your
agree.
point, Sarah, as far as like an extreme situation. We just mean in a day-to-day sense.
Oh yeah, no, in day-to-day, unless like your goal is like, say if you're there to shadow the director and you're there to learn and they've agreed to that, then you might, but then that's between you and them. Like if you're the AD, you know what I mean? So it depends where you are and what you're
Yeah.
doing and what's kind of acceptable for you to ask and stuff. And then if you're working and you want to learn stuff, I say if it's not too bothersome, ask some questions. I don't see a problem with that. If people don't like it, tough.
It depends on who you ask, because that was something we talked about last semester as well. If the director is working, he's going to have a million things. Try not to ask, like, I'll ask him this. No,
If you can
who to
ask, like
ask.
the thing was, if you can ask somebody else, and it doesn't have to be the director, and somebody else can know the same information, don't ask
Yeah.
the director. Same thing if you see the AD being super busy, or it's just like anything else. If someone else can answer your questions and someone else is being super busy, just ask the person who's not as busy.
Yeah,
I
I
might
guess
be able to help you.
that's probably why I like the smaller stuff, because there's way more room to talk to and get group mentality.
I mean, yes and no, because if the person is busy doing their job, even if it's a smaller production, at the end of the day, they won't have time to answer a bunch of questions from like people that are PAs or people that are working with cameras or whatever. At the end of the day, he's still there to do that job and concentrate solely on that. He might be able to later on, like, because it's a smaller production, hang out a little bit, have a beer, have a conversation with the crew later. But in the moment, it's more like he's there doing a job. If this is something kind of like the example we gave last semester as far as casting, and people that were extras, and if they needed to ask anything, who would they ask, and that kind of thing. Knowing who to ask and when it's appropriate to ask is really important as well.
Speaking of asking, does anyone have any questions or comments about room
Yeah.
tone?
So I was wondering earlier if like voice actors and like uh types like that needed to also capture room tone, and I found out that apparently yes.
Yep. So they were actually showing that in one of the videos. They were showing how that when you were doing ADR, audio dialogue replacement for the clip, they use room tone to match it because, you know, the room they're in is not sounding the same, so it actually doesn't sound like it's coming from the same space. So having that room tone and putting that into those voiceover or ADR clips actually does really help to what is it called? Like make it seem like it's the same, coming from the same place, even though it's really not.
Yeah, one of the videos even gave an example of with and without room tone that I thought was really good, explaining like the importance of it and this how it actually sounded different, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Like when you're cutting scenes together and that kind of thing.
But that's another reason why you want room tone as well. Like Raphael was asking, because you might not know that you need to replace the audio to replace the dialogue when you get into post-production until you hear it. And then you're like, oh, this isn't going to work because maybe you recorded outside and there was a plane that flew overhead. So now you need to replace that audio. Well, if you recorded that ambient sound of that location, then you're going to have, you know, whatever the sound was while you're on set, and it's going to sound like the same area instead of sounding like you're in a room, a controlled room, instead of outside like they were for the rest of the dialogue. So it's always good to have that ambient sound or the room tone so that they can match it to wherever it's supposed to be coming from in the scene.
Mhm.
And you can see like one of the things they said is if you don't capture room tone, you might have hopefully there's some areas in your edit, kind of like in this picture, where it's just you can find the room tone that's there and just kind of use that, like splice it up and then put it together so that you still have the room tone, but it's
They
a
wouldn't
lot
recommend
easier
relying
it's a
on
lot
that.
easier if you just record it on a separate track.
Yeah.
What, honey?
I said, yeah, they wouldn't recommend relying on that.
Right. That's only if you forgot to do it. You might be able to find it somewhere in your edit because the sound sometimes is recording before you actually start recording the dialogue or the action. But you don't want to have to rely on that. So you want to try to separate your room tone so you can easily find it and have it, make sure you have exactly what you need when you get into edit. Last thing we were talking about, Arden brought it up, wireless versus wired. We went over a lot of the things, and a lot of things that I figured were the reason why people say wired is usually better ended up being mostly the case. Audio pros say go wired whenever you can and only go wireless when you must. With wireless systems, there's always the chance of brief losses of sound, which would be like a dropout, or short bursts of static, which would be from interference from different devices, phones, radios, and stuff like that, making a short burst of static. And the dropouts would be however it's cabled, or if someone steps on it, or if just for whatever reason, however it's designed, it just, for even just a moment, drops that sound signal, then it'll just all of a sudden pop out and pop back in. And then that whole audio clip might not be might not be salvageable. So better sound quality with wired, as there's a clean direct signal path. You just have it going from the cable to the camera or the cable to the audio device, compared to having a wireless device where you have it going to a receiver, a transcoder, and then to a receiver, and then to the audio device. Instead, you just have it plugged directly in. So anytime you have a more streamlined system, it's going to be better. And that's why the wired system can produce better quality audio. It just has a quicker way to get there. The sound doesn't have to go through as many things to get to the point you need it to get to. So there's fewer equipment components as well. And that means that there's fewer equipment components that might get damaged or might fall off or might get interrupted. And that can also cause those signals to be lost, because when one piece of the system doesn't work, the rest of it is useless. So if you have the transcoder that's not working for your wireless system, it doesn't matter if your receiver and your wireless mic and your recorder are working. Well, it's not going to pick up the signal because the transcoder's messed up. So it's a lot more pieces of devices to think about and look at, make sure they're all working properly and functioning properly, and that they're all, if you're battery powering them, that they're all charged so that they can, have that full signal and work
Also,
functionally.
Dumb question, but did anybody else think transponder sounded like a funny made up word?
Transcoder.
Transponder too. Transcoder and all this kind of, I don't know, it just sounded
We're
like
talking
science
about
fiction to
wires.
me.
It's a transcoder going to the receiver.
Yeah, it just sounds funny and made up to me. I know that's very stupid, and the professionals might make fun of me if they ever hear this, or any person who knows about sound might be like, "Ugh, whatever." But I don't know, it was just funny to me. I was just like, that sounds made up.
Yeah, it does. Some of these words definitely sound made up, especially when I was hearing, I can't remember what it was. It was something with lighting. It just sounded so fake. The way the light bulbs worked, like however it worked, the words they used sounded like it was off
It sounded like science fiction,
a
right?
cartoon or science fiction where they're making up words to make it sound like something sciencey. But it's like a real thing, so it's just funny.
Reminded me of Dr. Draken explaining his inventions or something. It was really funny. But yeah, I'm sorry. I just needed to put that dumb comment in. I guess it was just me.
So the other good thing about wired, of course, is, like I said, batteries. You don't have to worry about keeping everything charged. You don't have to worry about charging the batteries. You don't have to worry about bringing the batteries. There aren't any. You can just plug directly into your thing and you're good. So it's a faster setup time. It's easier to operate because there's less devices and less things to set up. So it's quicker and it's easier. And it's generally less expensive, most likely because it doesn't have as many parts. It doesn't have as many things that it has to do to get the sound to work to one point to the other. All right, now, however, wired is not good when you, most of the time, wired isn't good when you are shooting narrative stuff and you are having either the camera move independently of the character or the character move independently of the camera. If they're moving in unison, it might work. But if they're moving independently, it's going to be a lot of tripping hazard because of cables. The person's tethered to the camera because they're actually having a cable go from their audio device to the camera or to the recording device. So they're tethered to whatever they are connected to, and that thing has to stay with them. Otherwise, it's going to cause a problem because the mic might get the cable might get pulled out if they move too far away, or if they move a certain angle, it might make a weird scratch noise because the parts of the metal hit each other differently than they would if they were plugged directly in. And so it becomes a really big problem when you have a lot of movement. Also, because you can usually see wired stuff, it's harder to hide. So that's, obviously you don't want to have a mic. It's easier to do when you're doing just random video projects. You're just talking to the camera, you're doing vlogs, or you're doing, some kind of corporate video or a tutorial or something like that. You can see a mic and it's fine. It doesn't matter. But in a narrative project, it's a lot harder because you don't want to see that mic. It gives away the whole illusion that this is actually happening and it takes people out of the story. So one of the biggest cons is that it's, a lot harder to hide, and that the cable is going to get in the way and they're going to be tied to that camera, and you want to be able to have them be free and move around and, do all that stuff. And when you're using longer cables, they might require an XLR adapter so that they aren't just that 3.5 mm, because those will start to mess up apparently if they're long, because of the way the audio sends the signal. I guess it messes up somewhere in between if it's like really long, and then you have to get like the XLR adapter, which would be kind of like using a shotgun mic with those XLR cables. So the wireless pros are freedom of movement. There's no cables to trip on or avoid. The input connector is not going to short out due to constant movement either. Even if they're just moving a little bit with a wired, you could have it short out because it's not supposed to be moved that much. So even if you find a way to make it work with wired audio, you can, which you sometimes you can sometimes hide it, and you can sometimes even have them close to the camera. But if they're moving back and forth, maybe they're pacing, even though it works and the cable's not going to be shown, and they don't have to, you don't have to move the camera because the cable's good enough, long enough for them to do what they need to do. It could still mess up because it's scraping that cable where it's plugged in, scraping that back and forth, and eventually it could short out because it's not supposed to do that. It's supposed to meant to just stay still pretty much.
So Raphael felt sorry for me and he said, yeah, it's a weird word. But I wanted to know, Raphael, since Arden's not here, to text her and thank her for
Arden's
the
here.
suggestion.
She's
she
here.
is?
I'm here.
Oh, I didn't see her in the beginning. She must have come in a few minutes later.
Maybe
Sorry.
we should
Hi,
take
Arden.
attendance.
I just wanted to. Well, we try to. We ask you guys to tell us when you're coming and when you're not. But
you tell them, honey.
But basically, I wanted to thank you, Arden, because that was actually a really interesting, vital piece of information that we learned because of you.
Yeah,
Which the
I never
wireless
knew
versus
like it
the
was like
wired
a lot
thing?
better. I just figured it was just more expensive because it was a wireless, but apparently wired is better if you can get away with it. It'll give you more quality audio for cheaper, pretty much.
I always imagined it was better just because like it takes frequencies and stuff like that, but you can have
Also,
conflict.
if you think about it, anything that uses like a Bluetooth signal, like I think the best example I could give is like when you have like earbuds or headphones, like when you have Bluetooth ones, or like, I mean, I could say wireless, but like it's typically Bluetooth. It's like it's much more likely like, oh, you have to be like you can't be more than a certain distance away from like your phone when you're trying to listen to music.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just like the same thing applies to any device in terms of like wired versus wireless.
That's
Like,
true.
I think
There's a
just
lot more
wireless
things
is
that
just
can interrupt the signal.
Yeah,
than
it's just more
in there.
unstable in general.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
the
knew
wireless
some, but
cons,
yeah, I didn't
wireless
know it was
cons,
the
of
same.
course, are batteries, interference or dropout, like we just said. They're more expensive, so they're a lot more expensive. If you want the same quality, they're way more expensive. And entry-level wireless systems might have degraded quality because they're just not properly set up the same way, and so they just might have a lot worse quality than you'd get with a wired, even at the same price range.
And you were
So-
going to talk about the frequency thing, because that's another thing that freaked me out.
What do you mean?
The fact that if you are on like a US frequency,
Oh,
can-
another, yeah, like that was so when you do have wireless things, if you're buying wireless devices in like the US or Canada or something like that, and you're filming in US or Canada, it's good. But if you take them to other countries, you just want to be aware of whatever channels you're recording on and all of that, because there are very specific wireless frequencies that different countries use for their military or for, radio, and different things are using these different wireless frequencies. And so you might get a device in the US and then go over to the Middle East, and all of a sudden you're in their
No, he said UK. The
UK.
example he gave was UK. Yeah. It was like,
Oh, you
if
might get one
go-
from the United States. I was just giving an example. I don't know. Anyway,
No, I know, but that specific example he gave kind of freaked me out, because he said if you go to the UK with that equipment, you might end up in their military frequency or whatever, and you might get jailed for that. So you pay like
you just
a
want
huge
to be aware if
fine.
you're trying to film, internationally, that you have to most likely get different equipment, or if you are able to change the frequencies which your devices work on. So
look into
keep
how
that in
that
mind.
works and all this kind. I just thought it was so interesting because I knew that voltage is something to think about as well when you're talking about lighting and equipment and stuff like that, because the UK, New Zealand, Australia, they have a different voltage, I'm pretty sure. Or is it Brazil? I don't know. Like some
Yeah, they
countries.
do.
Okay.
They kind of always do.
It's
Yeah.
I think most other countries use, or like I don't know if it's like most or like half and half. Because like other countries, especially like in Asia, they use 220. And
Yeah, I
here they
remember New
use
Zealand
here
doing
they use 110.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think in New Zealand they use a 222 when I was there because like I remember
I
my hair
actually,
dryer
I'm
wouldn't
pretty
work.
sure it's either one or the other. I've never heard of like any other voltage being used.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I remember I had to buy a new hair dryer at the time because mine wouldn't work because of the voltage issue or something like that. And so just that kind of thing too, that you have to consider if you are ever shooting overseas and you're bringing
If
your
you-
equipment.
Sorry
You're
to
at the
interrupt.
point where you
Hello.
can shoot overseas. You should know this.
If you I mean
Yeah.
this more often will apply to us than like if someone buys like camera equipment overseas and then brings it here.
Yeah, definitely.
If you use something that's made for 110 voltage and you like, even if you have like a converter, not like if you're not using like an energy converter, if you're using just something that changes the switch, it can fry your whatever device you have.
Yeah. So if you guys are buying equipment online, make sure to check the voltage, see if it's compatible with where you live.
And
Yeah,
just
if
get
it's
a
coming from
conver-
another
just get
country, just
something
make sure
that
it's compatible for.
just
it's
get
made for-
something that says it's a converter, like that does the electricity conversion. Because if not,
yeah.
it will most definitely fry whatever device you have, because it's gonna send way too much voltage to it.
And then just explode it.
Yeah. Well, it'll start smoking and probably just stop working like immediately.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that was not fun.
Does anyone have any questions?
That was an
or comments
expensive
about
hair
wired
dryer
versus
too. It
wireless
was really
setups?
annoying.
Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
Like, what if you're using what if you're charging your freaking camera battery? Like, that's scary.
Just
Oh,
use a
you- oh, yeah.
converter. Just make sure you're using something like they have it. You can literally buy it on Amazon. It's like
Okay, but like, what are the chances that we like go to another country where it's like 240 or some crazy thing
220.
like that? I think
I would look
the
up. I would
Crazy.
just look up a map because it's like a lot of countries that use that.
No,
voltage.
I did look it up.
Well, the other thing about it is like if you are going to another country, a lot use different outlets as well. So you'd have to get adapters for
Oh yeah,
different cable
yeah, definitely.
adapters, so that you do like 2 or 3 prong to
There are
how the New Zealand do it, or how Brazil, or how they all do them very differently.
There
Yeah, that was
are,
another thing that I was gonna say. Also having different prongs for different countries and that kind of thing. Like Brazil is the round ones, like the little round 2 ones. New Zealand is the 3 prong ones. And they're like 2 round and 1. No, I think it's like 2 straight and 1 round, or vice versa. Something
I
like
think
that.
it's like one like a V or something, but yeah.
I was.
Yeah,
I
no,
was
it's
gonna say
triangle. It's
the-
triangular. Yeah, but I know that like there's some country that also has like some are round and some are straight. I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, like Iran, for example, has round ones. But I was gonna say that the some converters you can get have multiple prongs built in them.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Because especially for us, like we're buying equipment online, a lot of stuff might be secondhand as well. So it's always good for us to know where it's coming from, if it's going to be compatible with our equipment.
Yeah, just stuff like that. Like there's really different ways.
Another thing is
doing it.
how much, if we're talking about lighting, how much energy does it need? Because that was another thing we learned in lighting that I thought was interesting, was like some take up a lot of energy, so you need to make sure that the
Voltage.
place, a lot of voltage, yeah.
I didn't
So the
understand that.
place that you're shooting, you need to make sure that you have enough, you have an ability to use that much. that
If
are
you're using
blowing
those
your entire
HMI lights, you just want to be sure that you have enough voltage or you have enough amperage in your what am I trying to say? That that whatever location you're at is able to power that thing without shorting out. Because if you plug too many things into that same outlet and you're using like 3 HMI lights and you plug them all in the same outlet, there's a chance it's just going to fry the whole thing and even cause a fire. So you always want to be aware of that, and that's why the location scout needs to look out for that. And then the gaffer will go on the location, the tech scout, and kind of check it out himself too, just to be sure that whatever kind of lights they're going to use are going to be able to be in that location. And if not, he needs to order some generators that can power those things. Does anyone have any questions or comments about anything that we learned over today? Did I get anything wrong? Anything like that? All right. So lastly, what we're doing on Monday, we're going to be talking about natural lighting, which is just using like ambient natural lighting to light your videos, not using artificial lights. Natural lighting is just using whatever light's available. So that'll be that's for this a good way to look at how you can get things to look good even if you don't have the lighting equipment for it. We're gonna be looking at negative fill, what it's used for. We already talked about it some and kind of looked over it, but we're just gonna go in a little more depth into it. Talked about this a little bit, wild tracks, just getting recordings that aren't attached to any video, any video recording. So there's no video to go with it. It's just a track of audio for editing purposes, so that you can use it for like if you were doing ambient noise, that'd be a wild track, something like that. Then what to look for when location scouting. So we'll probably talk again about the prongs and these other things that we were just talking about now, like the voltage and all of that. We'll be talking about that a little more, and we'll talk about other things that location scouts need to look for when they're going to locations and they're scouting them out for their production. And then lastly, remember everybody that we still have the, trying to find it. Where is it at? The exercise, the audio exercise to do. That's going to be due, oh, here it is, October 12th. Record a 15 to 30 second long video clip, trying to get the audio as good as you can. All you have is your phone. Try to get an app that shows you and allows you to view what the audio will be like, or hopefully allows you to adjust it to up the gain or lower the gain, even if it's recording it through your phone. And try going from whispering to yelling or yelling to whispering, and try to capture it as best you can. Even if you have to capture a few different clips, remember, you can do that. You just need to record that room tone so that you can overlay that over the edit so that it all sounds similar and it doesn't sound like it's getting quiet all of a sudden. There's no noise, and then all of a sudden it's getting noise again, because it'll be very noticeable. So just keep that in mind. And that'll be October 12th, which, we changed the meeting from that Monday, October 11th. We changed that to October 12th, Tuesday, October 12th. That's when the audio exercise will be due. If you're not able to make that meeting, you can still just turn in the audio exercise to us and we'll go over it at some point at a different date. But Tuesdays when we'll be going over everybody's in the meeting itself. So yeah, if you want to just be creative, don't worry too much about the video part, just worry about audio.
Sounds great. Awesome. Nice to see you guys. I always like talking with you guys. You guys are like cool.
Thanks.
Well, no, I mean, like,
Thanks.
I don't know. Could be-
Oh, thank you.
some people are like, don't get too attached to people you work with, or blah, blah. I'm like,